In this video, I'll finish out the medians worksheet under the infinite geometry section on the KutaSoftware website. So picking up where we left off with number 13, it says to find x if ET equals 3x plus 2 and EM equals 5x. So we're solving for ET, which we know is going to be 2/3 of the distance from E to M, equals 2/3 of the distance EM. And that's because of the centroid theorem. So now I'm going to plug in my equations. ET is 3x plus 2, and that's equal to 2/3 times EM, which is 5x. And now I'll simply solve for x. 3x plus 2 equals 2/3 times 5x, which 2/3 times 5 is 10/3 x. I'll subtract 3x from both sides to get that 2 is equal to 10/3 x minus 3x, which is 10/3 x minus 9/3 x, which is 1/3 x. And then I'll multiply both sides by 3 so that my 1/3 cancels out to get that 6 is equal to x. So 6 is my solution in number 13. In number 14, I'm finding x if kt is equal to 6x plus 5, and we know that kt is 2/3 of that distance from k to b, which kb is 11/5 x minus 6/5. So kt equals 2/3 of kb. So kt, 6x plus 6 over 5 equals 2/3 of 11 over 5 x minus 6/5. My first step, I'll distribute this 2/3. So I'll get that 6x plus 6 over 5 equals 2/3 times 11/5, which is 22 over 15 times x, minus 2 times 6 is 12 over 3 times 5, which is 15. Then, in order to get this 5 out of the denominator, I'll multiply both sides by 5, which means that I'm going to be distributing a 5. So I'll have 6x plus 6 equal to 22 times 5, which is 110, over 15, times x, which, when simplified, is 7 1/3 x, minus 12/15 times 5, which equals 4. So now I'm going to move my terms with x to the right, so subtracting 6x from both sides, and I'm going to move my terms without x to the left, so adding 4 to both sides. 6 plus 4 is 10, and 10 is equal to 7 1/3 times x minus 6x, which is 1 1/3 x, which we can write 1 1/3 as 4/3 x. My next step, I'll multiply both sides by 3/4. That way, my 4/3 will cancel out. So I'll get that 3/4 times 10, which is 7.5, is equal to x. So 7.5 is my solution. And number 15, I'm finding CQ, given that CR equals x and C to Q is 2x minus 6. So as opposed to finding x, I'm finding CQ. And I know that CQ is congruent to CR. So CQ equals CR. So if CQ is 2x minus 6, then 2x minus 6 is equal to CR, which is x. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides to get that x minus 6 is equal to 0. Then I'll add 6 to both sides to get that x is equal to 6. So knowing that x is 6, I can then plug in 6 for my equation of CQ, since I'm solving for CQ. So CQ equals 2 times x minus 6. So CQ equals 2 times 6 minus 6, which 2 times 6 is 12, minus 6 equals 6. So CQ equals 6 for number 15. In number 16, I'm finding AS, given that AR is x minus 1/2 and AS is x plus 5 over 2. So since AS is congruent to AR, since A is the midpoint, then I can say that AS is equal to AR. So AS, x plus 5 over 2 equals AR, which is x minus 1/2. I'm going to start by multiplying both sides by 2. And in doing that, the 2 on the left will cancel out the 2 in the denominator. So I'll have x plus 5 on the left. And I'll distribute the 2 on the right. So I'll have 2x minus 1. I'll subtract x from both sides to get that 5 equals x minus 1. And then I'll add 1 to both sides to get that 6 is equal to x. So now, knowing that 6 is x, I can take that 6 and plug it in for my x in AS since I'm finding AS. So AS equals x plus 5 over 2. So AS equals 6 plus 5 over 2, which equals 11 divided by 2, and 11 over 2 equals 5.5. So AS equals 5.5 in number 16. And that's because we know that the midpoint of SR is A, therefore AS is congruent to AR because A is the endpoint of a median. In number 17, we're finding XQ if MQ equals 3x minus 3 and XQ equals 2x minus 6. XQ is what we're finding, and we're given that that's 2x minus 6, and we're given that MQ, the total length of the median, is 3x minus 3. We know that m to x would be 2/3 of m to q, so that means that x to q is 1/3 of m to q. So xq equals 1/3 of the length mq. So plugging in both our equations, xq is 2x minus 6, and that's equal to 1/3 of mq, which is 3x minus 3. So now distributing that 1/3, I'll get that 2x minus 6 equals 1/3 times 3x, which is x, minus 1/3 times 3, which is 1. I'll subtract x from both sides, which will cancel out my x's on the right, and I'll also add 6 to both sides, which will cancel out my 6's on the left, essentially moving my terms with x to the left and my terms without x to the right. 2x minus x is equal to x, and that's equal to negative 1 plus 6, which is a positive 5. So knowing that x is equal to 5, I can plug that value of x, which is 5, in for xq, 2x minus 6. So knowing that xq equals 2x minus 6, I'll plug in 5 for x, so I'll get 2 times 5 minus 6, which is 10 minus 6, which equals 4. xq equals 4 in number 17. And lastly, on this worksheet, number 18. In 18, we're finding JW, given that JW is 6x plus 2, and JB, the total length of that median, is 10x plus 1. So JW, we can see, is 2/3 of J to B. So JW equals 2/3 JB. Plugging in JW and JB, we'll get 6x plus 2 equals 2/3 of 10x plus 1. Distributing that 2/3, I'll get 6x plus 2 equal to 20/3 x plus 2/3. I'll subtract 6x from both sides to get that 2 is equal to 20/3 x minus 6x, which we can think of 6x as 18/3. So 20/3 minus 18/3 is 2/3 x, and we're adding that to 2/3. So then I'll subtract 2/3 from both sides to get that 2/3 x is equal to 2 minus 2/3, which is 4/3. I'll multiply both sides by 3/2 so that my 2/3 cancels out. 3 times 4 is 12, 2 times 3 is 6, 12 over 6 equals x, and 12/6 is the same as a whole number 2, since 12 divided by 6 is 2. So 2 equals x. So now that I know what x is, I'll plug that 2 in for my x in JW, since I'm finding JW. So JW equals 6x plus 2, and knowing that 2 is x, I'll plug in 2 for x, so 6 times 2 plus 2. That's equal to 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 2, and 12 plus 2 is 14. So JW equals 14 for our last problem, number 18. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. Also, if you have any questions, leave it in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.